Thank you. Well, it gives me great pleasure to be here tonight. This is the 22nd series of the Edinburgh Lectures. They've been running since 1992, for anybody who wants to work that out, when they were set up as part of a programme of events to celebrate the UK's presidency of the European Union. The Edinburgh Lectures are a partnership, which is a unique town and gown collaboration with all 9 partners collaborating to present a very diverse and stimulating series of lectures. Each year, the series is themed to address a particular issue, and in 2014, the theme is City, Community, Home. And it reflects the Scottish Government's year of homecoming and aims to celebrate the nation's vibrant cultural and ancestral heritage as we welcome the world to our shores for the forthcoming Commonwealth Games, the Ryder Cup, and of course our normal, exciting and innovative programme of events and festivals. All of our speakers will be exploring a wide range of topics, from the global impact of the Scottish people over the centuries to what lies in store for our cities in the future. Our speaker tonight, as you may know, is Richard Demarco, artist, director of the Demarco European Art Foundation. Throughout his life, Richard has been dedicated to the arts world, both as a teacher and promoter. His contributions to contemporary art have been recognised internationally, and he counts the German Order of Merit and the Gold Gloria Artis Medal of Poland amongst his many accolades. 11 days ago, I was just reminded by Richard that it was 11 days ago, I had the great pleasure of presenting the prestigious Edinburgh Award to Richard, recognising his outstanding contribution to the city throughout his achievements. Tonight, Richard will discuss his experiences of Edinburgh throughout his lifetime. As a home and prominent city of culture, a city whose landscape has seen many significant physical and social changes throughout the last 9 decades. Yes, I did say 9 decades. I know Richard hates to be pigeonholed, and this was something I learned very clearly at the Edinburgh Award. And for example, Richard said that art is just art. You don't need to qualify it beyond that. And Richard always speaks from the heart. And I would say that that is because, as far as Edinburgh is concerned, Richard is its heart, both historical, cultural, talking about our contemporary past, and also where we are in the world, our attitude, what Edinburgh brings to the world, and where we're going in the future. So that's why I'm particularly pleased to be here and introduce Richard tonight. The lecture tonight is the Edinburgh Festival and the Demarco Art Gallery. And they'll then, as you've just heard, have an opportunity for questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to welcome our speaker this evening, Richard Demarco.
Well, I have prepared notes, but as my wont, I really dislike the idea of my reading something in the presence of what I presume to be friends. One of the things I learned as a teacher was you have to know who is in the class and who is misbehaving, for example, and incapable of concentrating upon the subject. But actually, the subject today should be of interest to all of us, because it's about a city unique in the world, blessed with the only language which human beings have to use to their benefit, which links them with the language of the angels. We are told that the angels have a job to do, and that is to use language, use the human voice, not in the spoken word, as I'm doing, but in song. Can you imagine? Heavenly choirs at this moment doing their job. Well, we've got used to choirs from all over the world. We've got used to the sound of some of the most extraordinary choral music ever composed. And we've got used to the sound of some of the world's greatest orchestras, as if it is our natural right. Of course, I don't believe it is our natural right. I don't believe it's the natural right of any city to be so blessed. This festival is a miracle, I have to admit, because I remember the Edinburgh that I was born into, an Edinburgh in the 1930s, with no hope of the kind of programs that we have got used to over the years. The 1930s, of course, happens to define a decade that I loved. I think it was the last time I could believe that modern architecture, modernity was a good idea, because this city had some of the most beautiful Art Deco buildings imaginable. And they were being built in my lifetime. Can you imagine that? I saw all these modern buildings being put up. Most of them were known as cinemas. You remember? Princess Street had 3. Now there's none. What used to be a very wonderful cinema is now a bus station. The Regal Cinema doesn't possess that name. It was a splendid cinema, and as you entered it, you entered into a world where the decor was Art Deco. And that was probably the most important period of our 20th century history of architecture, straight out of something called the Bauhaus, which has nothing at all to do with Edinburgh College of Art. But the Bauhaus did exist. And because we're living in a century which is much troubled by the legacy of the previous century, gosh, I can't believe it. I was speaking about last century. Can you imagine that? Of course, I can't get used to the fact that the 20th century is over, and I don't think most people alive today, especially politicians, have got any idea that we're living in a new century with new rules, new regulations, new concepts, new challenges. And of course, I was reminded that the Edinburgh lectures began, the Lord Provost was kind enough to remind me that we did believe in our role in the idea of the European Union. And probably most of you are wondering what on earth was going on in that dialogue, that conversation between Nick Clegg and a chap called Farage. It wasn't great art, was it? It was full of tension. I don't think it was up to the standards of the official Edinburgh Festival. But nevertheless, it had many points which we have to consider now when we think not just of the past. If you think of the 67 years of the Edinburgh Festival? I'm trying to think of them. And I experienced every single one. Can you imagine that? Nobody deserves that kind of experience. What did I do right? What did my parents do right to have me born? Oh, by the way, I want to scotch the idea that I was born in Portobello. I wasn't. I was born in the West End of Edinburgh, in what is now a hotel. the Grosvenor, I think. And as I am invited every now and again to walk through the doors, I think, my God, did I actually come out through that doorway into a world in 1930, which was halfway between the two great events that have colored our lives and certainly caused the 20th century to be one which we should really like to forget. I don't think the human race has misbehaved to the extent that it did in the 20th century. Despite all the inventions and all the so-called advantages, there were two halves of what I call a great war. We are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the beginning of this extraordinary madness, beginning of the First World War, and I don't think there's anybody in this room that doesn't have some kind of relation, some memory of someone close to their family history who was somehow involved. I knew, because I'm old enough to remember, many people who fought in the first half. That's what I'd like to think of it as. The first half of this global conflict. And by the way, the whole thing was played out without a fax machine. Can you imagine that? Without the convenience of an email. Without all these funny things that people have in their hands as pedestrians misbehaving because they're looking at the machine and not at the world around them. We have moved a great deal from the beginning of that century, which caused us to be involved in horror beyond horrors. And now that we see all these images on television, and we see the face of Paxman as the world authority, a young man who can't possibly remember the 30s. Think of that. Paxman wasn't there. I think he likes to fancy the fact that he was everywhere, and he's an expert on the human condition. I regard him as an up-and-coming young fellow who's probably not going to live long enough to see the 22nd century. But anyway, I have a great responsibility. I have to talk about the Edinburgh pre-festival and the Edinburgh since 1947. Oh God, I don't believe that. Do you believe that? Honestly? When did the war end? The second part of the great global conflict. It ended in 1945. I remember I was at school and I wasn't at all happy. I couldn't see the point of celebrating when I had in my mind images of the Holocaust, of Auschwitz and Belsen. And I was old enough, still at school, to know there was a VE day and a VJ day. But the VJ day was all about the fact that we'd have to drop a couple of atomic bombs on unsuspecting civilian populations. I thought, what a way to end the war. Of course, it was to save the lives of real human beings who were not wearing Japanese uniforms. It was a madness. The Japanese people were involved in a madness. We were involved in a madness. They were misbehaving in a way that you can hardly imagine. So, I have to paint this picture of a war. And Princess Street, during the war, full of American soldiers wearing the most expensive uniforms imaginable, smoking the most extraordinary cigarettes, Camel, I think it was Camel cigarettes, with a different smell to the ones that we were smoking. And there were many people in uniform. But I don't think Italian prisoners of war were allowed on Prison Street. They were confined to the outskirts of Edinburgh, to the high street of Portobello for a start. And they, during the war, were wandering around. Oh, here's Terry coming with my speech. It does really matter. It is typed out, actually, for you, and you can see that it bears some resemblance to what I've said so far. But actually, what I'm really talking about is not just the history of the festival, not just the history of the Demarco Gallery, whatever that was. You notice it's no longer in existence. It's not about the Travers Theatre. It's not about the world of John Calder or Jim Haynes in the paperback bookshop. It's not about any of these things. It's really about how the people of Edinburgh, that includes the Italian community, and I suppose the Polish community that joined us because they couldn't go home, how they managed to survive something unthinkable. Of course, I didn't leave school until I was 18, and therefore I was still at school when something was on the horizon, because our idea of a peace treaty wasn't exactly as we would have liked it. Whatever happened at Yalta caused the inevitability of the Iron Curtain to appear in our lives. And the Cold War and the Berlin Wall. So try to imagine 1947 is more or less the beginning of something just as stupid as, what's the word? Oh, gosh, I hate being tied to this desk. It's as if I'm giving a lecture, which I never give. I don't have time to consider what happens when a human being has to give a lecture. I'm not giving a lecture. I'm sharing my ideas and thoughts with you. And you've got a great deal to say about how the world has changed and how the Edinburgh Festival itself has somehow or another touched your lives. Because I think it's touched everybody's lives. And one of the problems we have now, of course, is how we get across the whole story to the young generations that are going to inherit something, I suppose it's the future. Politicians like talking about it, don't they? But every time I hear what they have to say, I realize that I shouldn't pay too much attention. Because they're not using the one language we have to use, which is the language that has blessed this city. It's the language of all the arts. That's the one language that endures across the decades, across the centuries. And it's the one language we're very good at not using. Really. At the bottom of our list of things to do in terms of local or central government, you'll probably find that culture comes pretty low. And that's because we make the mistake of separating whatever the world of culture is with the world of education. Now, my qualification to speak to you here is as. My only qualification, the only one I earned, is as a school teacher, and that makes me a friend of the Lord Provost. He's a school teacher. That's what he is. Forget about the Lord Provost and the chain around his neck. That's a big responsibility. But he came to be the Lord Provost through the experience, the ennobling experience of having to face many classrooms full of young people, knowing that if he got it wrong, he would destroy the lives of these extraordinary young people. I remember that I was taught myself, not very successfully, so I left school without any qualifications whatsoever. Because in these days, if you failed English, you failed the whole lot. And I remember my favorite subject at school was English, English literature in particular. But the essay that they gave you to write in these days, oh my gosh, what was it, 1949? Was they gave you a choice of three choices, and I disliked all three. So I invented my own subject. and wrote an essay on that. And of course, dealing with the kind of bureaucratic mind that must have looked at this thing and said, oh, the 20 marks or whatever it was that you get, which is the bulk of the mark making process, he doesn't deserve it, he's not getting it. So naturally, I failed. And with that, I failed my history, although I loved history, and I failed geography, which I loved. And I didn't sit any subject to do with science. And I was speaking to a friend of mine in this audience, because I remember going to the headmaster and saying, I want to study science. And I could see that he had that look on his face of thinking over my dead body, because you're going to fail science, you're no good at it. And we've got to keep this was the beginning of that time when education was all about passing exams, which I've never believed in. And he was speaking to someone who was going to be a failure in studying science. But I knew then, as I know now, that you cannot separate the world of science from the world of the arts, the world of the sciences and the world of the arts. And I noticed that I was following in the footsteps, receiving the Edinburgh Award, the footsteps of Professor Higgs. And I felt deeply touched, honoured indeed, that I belonged in this way to his world. Because there's nothing, no explanation, no theory can suggest to me that the arts and the sciences should be separate. My favourite artist of all time, perhaps in terms of history, is Leonardo da Vinci. He knew a thing or two about scientific examination of the world. And I'd just like to point out one thing here. We now have a science festival. I'd like to see the day when the science festival is at the same time as the arts festival. And that would help bridge the gap between the two. Because I feel that I've never recovered from not studying botany, chemistry, physics, and of course mathematics at school, and knowing what it was like to fail. And really, that's what life's all about, isn't it? Failure. Of course, the arts are very, very important, because in science, you could actually think that you've achieved something because you've got something written down, some kind of theory. But if you're a wise scientist, like Einstein, you know that it really doesn't add up to very much, because someone will come along and rethink it, and you'll get a different theory. Science is not the same as art, because it's a different way of looking at the mystery of being. But art is perhaps the important factor that the scientists should take into account. Because the difference between science and art is very simple. The thing that exists is there for the scientists to discover. It's there. The law of whatever. The law that Professor Higgs has discovered. Of course, that's only the tip of the iceberg. There are about 5 million other laws behind it that are still to be discovered. Nevertheless, you can spend a whole lifetime, as he has done, worrying about this. The artist, and there are one or two artists here, and I'm very reassured by their presence. In fact, we have the president of the Royal Scottish Academy here, and he has a terrifying responsibility not only to make art, but to keep in order the lives of so many artists. And all of them are, at their best, creating something which is not there as some scientific fact is there. They are creating something that's never existed before. Can you imagine what the world would have been like if Van Gogh hadn't painted the sunflowers or the yellow chair? Nobody asked him to do it. But the world would have been immeasurably, how can I say, reduced in value if we didn't have these two marvelous paintings to think about. And the quality of the paint. What a waste of time, according to most politicians. People making marks on a canvas. People sculpting or composing music. When they should be really proving that they can become multi-millionaires. Every time I see that list of 500 of the richest people living and working in Britain, I think, oh God, what did they do wrong? How can I pray for them? How can I help them? That's not the reason for being alive. The reason for being alive is to look at the last artwork you've done, the last thing that you know is about creativity, and to know that you've failed again. Once you know that, you have the possibility of doing another artwork, which is probably going to be another failure, but which works. Actually, I must now quote Sam Beckett's incredible definition of what he did. There was a young American student apparently at one point saying to him, "Tell me, Mr. Beckett, I'm trying to write plays, become a playwright. What is it you do that makes you such a successful playwright?" And his answer was, I think, something we should all think about. His answer was, "I don't know. I'm not sure. All I know is I try. I try. And then I try again. And then I try harder. And then I fail. Then I fail again. And I fail harder." So I'm going to ask you a question. Which of the plays of Shakespeare, that genius of geniuses, which of the paintings of Rembrandt define failure rather than success? Even the greatest thing that we do has some kind of mark of failure. Because being human, we are not given to create something perfect. But we can get as near as damn it. When you think of the plays of Beckett, there are moments when you can hardly believe that the human condition has been so defined. And we become very grateful. In fact, it's all there in the sound of Mozart and Beethoven, played by an incomparable orchestra. Do you remember, any of you, I'm going to be asking this question at the end, the first Edinburgh Festival? Was anyone there at the Edinburgh Festival? Just reassure me. One person. Can you put your hand up, please, Paul? There you are. One person was there. I was there. Do you remember Kathleen Ferrier singing? Her voice. That marvelous, extraordinary woman who died so young. You don't. It doesn't matter. Did you somehow or another listen to the glory of the Vienna Symphony Orchestra, Philharmonic? Did you listen to them?
The very first festival, so long ago, I can't really remember any of the events.
I need you to help me remember, Paul.
At that time, I was actually still in the army. And,
Oh, you're still in the army?
And I came back on leave for actually for the whole length of the festival, I think, for the whole 3 weeks, as far as I can remember.
You came home to Scotland so that you could benefit from the experience of the first Edinburgh Festival. And you're telling me you can't quite remember. Yes?
We weren't there, but we know someone who was.
Well, you weren't there, but you know someone who was there. And I want every one of you to think of someone you know who was there. Can you remember 3 weeks and the sun shone brightly every day? Oh my gosh. That meant divine intervention was involved. And it also meant that we could hear the Vienna musicians play for the first time in 5 years. They were playing in Edinburgh, not in Vienna. That was the miracle. And they were playing German music. And the director of the festival, I mean, imagine, Germany was a dirty word, wasn't it? German wasn't the sort of word you use in polite company. But nevertheless, the first festival came into being because there was a small group of people who believed that we had to do something to help heal the wounds of war. That's what caused the Edinburgh Festival to come into being, the need to heal the wounds of war. It's written down. Even Lord Provost Falconer said that. That's why the festival had to happen, to give a message to the whole world that the greatest living artists then would help us use that language. If we can't use that language, we end up using the language of Farage and Clegg. It'll have to do, but it's not the language. And I noticed last night that Farage has a gift of language, so therefore he won. Okay? There was some kind of creativity there. Not that the other chap didn't have something serious to say. He did. Now, the one thing that I do believe is that everyone is born to be creative. And who was the most creative Lord Provost of all time running the festival? Was it Sir John Falconer who said, "Let it be"? Was it Jack Kane, the first Labour Lord Provost, who helped create the Craig Miller Festival? My goodness me, the one part of Edinburgh you didn't want to belong to. But Yehudi Menuhin went there. You remember? Do any of you remember? The greatest violinist in the world went there to play. So, my memories are so overwhelming that they are causing me to feel inadequate in your company. How many people remember the first ever production of the Free Estates? Again, Paul, thank God you're sitting there right in front. And Paul is actually older than I am. Isn't that right, Paul? You're not 83 as I am. You are?
No, I'm 93.
93. He's got 10 years ahead of me. And the reason why he's so committed to being alive so committed to speaking to all generations of human beings living in this country, so committed to the cause of Scottish independence, is that he is 100% creative. And I've got advice to give to all of you. When you become creative, you have the possibility of being alive, needed. The thing that I cannot bear is the sight of all these young people, the 60-year-olds and the 70-year-olds, all, oh, I don't know, sitting around in old folks' homes. That's where I should be. If I ever had it in my mind to retire, if you are using the language of art, you cannot retire because you know you haven't finished the job. No time to be on holiday. You've had it. Once you begin to use that language, you're using it to the end of your life, just as Matisse did when he couldn't use his hands because of arthritis. He then found he could cut pieces of paper, colored paper, and make some of the greatest artworks. Oh, by the way, this is completely nonsense I'm speaking, because he wasn't really an artist if he was 80, over 80, was he? The only artist this present government thinks about are those defined as emerging artists. That means they're not allowed to win the, what's it called? I don't want to use it, it's a kind of dirty word. The Turner Prize. You've got to be under the age, I don't know what it is, 50, 40, but anything above that, you've had it. Well, we're living in an age when the Turner Prize rules the roost, certainly in Glasgow School of Art, where there are so many Turner Prize winners produced every year. I keep wondering what on earth is wrong with that school. I thought they were supposed to be teaching art. Anyway, we are now facing a great challenge. And I think that in my text, I mentioned the fact that the festival changed my life, and it changed the lives of everybody I respect who would be defined as a citizen of Edinburgh. But it also changed the lives of countless numbers of people who do not have the advantage of being citizens of Edinburgh. I'd like to speak to the council about this. I'd like to find out how many of them there do not use the language of the arts and are simply playing the role of politicians. It's not enough. I'd like to speak to everyone about their memories of the festival, and I'm giving you a little book to sign, which says, well, gives me your name, your address, your email, if you like, but your thoughts on what I'm trying to say. Oh, by the way, do you associate me with the fringe? Do you? You shouldn't. Because all the great work I've ever been allowed to do has been done under the aegis of the official festival. Did you know that? How on earth could I have gone to Poland to speak to the Minister of Culture, or to Germany, to the Minister of Culture there, or to Romania, or to France, if I was saying, I represent the French? Not quite, it's not quite the right, well, part of the festival. I had to be official. And therefore I should really be telling you the moment of truth when, in his office, there was the director of the Edinburgh Festival in 1967, a chap called Peter Diamond. And he wasn't, of course, from Edinburgh, he was Dutch. And he was the successor to Lord Harwood. And I said to him, look, all the musicians, all the actors, all the dancers that you have at the festival are all alive. I've noticed that. they jump up and down, they sing, they're alive. But all the artists that you show from the beginning, 1947 until 1967, are all dead. We were really into showing dead artists, making sure that they couldn't be causing any trouble, of course. And I said, I've got an idea. You've probably never been to the Venice Biennale, but the Venice Biennale is all about living artists, contemporary artists, telling the human race what it's like to be alive now, not yesterday, now, in relation to the past, in relation to the future, right? Why don't we have a program of what we call, I hate to use this word, contemporary art. Contemporary art. What a stupid idea. Modern art, another stupid idea. As the Lord Provost made it clear, there's only art. The only stuff that lasts is simply ending up as a language which we must use in the same way as we use science. You don't say modern science, do you? Not really. Or contemporary science. People would laugh at you. There's only one timeless thing that the Edinburgh Festival reminds us of every now and again. When we hear a sublime version of a particular piece of music by Brahms, or a sublime production of Shakespeare, if we see that, we know that we've touched something which is beyond the limitations of time. That's the other thing about art. It takes us out of the, how can I say, the prison house of time passing, beginning and ending. It's into a world of the eternal. Oh, dearie me. Is that right? So why don't I hear the people who are involved in the in speaking to the congregations in our fast emptying churches use the language of art? They don't. Why? Because everywhere in society now I see that we, the people of Edinburgh, are not convinced that it is the one great language. And do you know why the Traverse came into being? Because there was a small group of people who couldn't stand the thought that there would come a day after 3 weeks where you found yourself waving like a child at the circus leaving town. Oh, it's finished. We've now got to go back to the ordinary Edinburgh life. Without the festival, that's unthinkable. And there was a small group of people who said, we want the spirit of the festival to be with us every day of the year. And that's why the Traverse came into being. Not as a theatre, not as a gallery, but as a meeting place, a hauff. That's a good word, isn't it? Hauff. A place where friends meet. It had the best restaurant in town. And like every other place in Edinburgh, it didn't close up at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. And every possible aspect of Edinburgh society could be there, could be seen there with an international group of creative people. Well, actually, the Traverse is now a theatre. I'm not too happy about that. I'm not too happy about galleries either, because they have a limited time span, unless they're a national gallery, where they have the kind of money like the Tate, where they can entertain millions of people. Art is something you find at the workspace. Joseph Beuys was a great contributor to the festival. He was my friend. Leonardo da Vinci was apparently dead, so I couldn't communicate with him directly. So I had to get a 20th century equivalent, and his name was Joseph Beuys. Doesn't sound like a German name, does it? Because he comes from a very funny part of Germany, a Roman Catholic enclave, and he was part of the group of artists that I brought here, representing the international spirit of the 20th century. And it was a official festival. Oh, by the way, I didn't tell you what the meeting with Peter Diamond was all about, did I? I'll never forget. He never stopped the business of smoking a cigarette. As one went out, the other was lit. And he always got it right to the end. I remember him saying, yes, Ricky, good idea. You can do it. Do what? Your idea. A program of contemporary art, living artists. You can do it on one condition. Official festival. You pay for it. So that began my career as a fundraiser. I had to raise, this is why there's a rumor goes around that I don't know how to handle money. I had to raise $3.5 million so that all these exhibitions could be to the benefit of the Edinburgh Festival. I think I once got 250 quid from the Edinburgh Festival, and I didn't know what to do with it because it couldn't have helped. The money had to come from most unlikely places where the zloty didn't mean anything compared to the American dollar. It had to go, I had to go to these places because they wanted to be in Edinburgh. They recognized there was an international stage, free of the hullabaloo and madness of the political situation. They wanted to be there. By the way, the Edinburgh world then had an arts council who ended up as my mortal enemy. Can you believe that? Not very good, not very much fun when you know that you got to deal with them. Run by bureaucrats in the main, people who were desperately unhappy. But I remember thinking, as I found that the German government had just given something like £70,000 so an exhibition could appear at Edinburgh College of Art under the flag of the official festival, thinking, thank God I live in Europe, but I cannot bear the idea that the government that gave that money represented Western Germany. And the capital wasn't Berlin, the capital was Bonn. So for 50 years, I had to deal mainly with countries like the former Yugoslavia, like Hungary, like the Baltic states, that would give money to me to bring the greatest art that I could imagine, which wasn't in Chicago, wasn't in New York, wasn't in Los Angeles, because I had to go to all these countries as well, these places, to work out where the real truth was after the war. And I found it was in the most unlikely places, in cities like Krakow, where maybe there was one restaurant where you could actually find food to eat. In cities like Łódź. Oh, by the way, I'm wearing a tie, which tells you that I'm a citizen, an honorary citizen of this city. It's called Łódź. I have the freedom of that city, along with somebody called, what's his name? Marshal Pilsudski, the liberator of Poland, and what's his name? Roman Polanski. And in great contrast, of course, an artist called Pope John Paul II. And they're all there together in a city that had the last ghetto operating up until 1944, with the largest Jewish cemetery in the world, and with the first ever gallery of modern art. First, before New York, and the world's greatest museums dedicated to the art of tapestry. My God, how could I have ignored such a city? It can easily compete with Edinburgh, but it doesn't have a history. It's a modern city, and it's one of the world's greatest examples of modernity in terms of the fact it's jam-packed with Art Deco. And it was the first city, certainly, I think, in Europe to have a tramway system. Oh dear, I should mention that. Although I loved the tramway system of my youth in Edinburgh, it was the first city to have factories where the workers were being looked after in terms of education and health by the owners, who were also collectors. So I should take that city seriously, much more than Los Angeles, much more than Kansas City or Minneapolis or all these strange places, which don't have that quality that Edinburgh has of a city that's taken 2,000 years to come into being. Now, why do I paint Edinburgh? Apart from painting the landscape of Scotland, apart from painting the roads that lead from the land of my forebears, which is Italy, and the road taken by scholars, saints, kings, queens, through the ages. I call it the road to Mikosegi because it's the road to a particular farm, but it's really a road to farmscapes and to all those people who have to look after the kingdom of the animal and the kingdom of plants and give us our food. I don't know what I'm doing in the art world. Can you imagine me in the art world? I don't think the art world is up to it. Because everybody has a road, and you've got a road, each one of you, which takes you towards the footsteps of your forebears. Of most of the people, because I can see that the average age of this group isn't exactly 18. Although there's a young fellow here who's still at school, thank God. And that sort of gives me hope. But I think one of the most important things that we have to consider is how we become known as a creative force in society. And I think that means at the workplace, doesn't it? It's not just at your desk as a teacher, but at your desk as a Lord Provost. How do you really leave your mark? And how do you, each one of you, believe that Joseph Beuys was right? Everyone is an artist. Oh my God. You mean that includes people running the Bank of Scotland? And the Royal Bank, which is even more dodgy. I never thought I'd live to see the day. A bank was a holy, sacred place which you could trust. Things have changed because we can misuse the great forces that we have been given in our modern times to manifest greed, stupidity, and the funny feeling that celebrity can do you some kind of good. It can't. So what I'm talking about, because I now know that I've got 5 minutes, that I haven't, well, if you read my text, and all of you can get hold of it, you will see that I haven't deviated too much. But as I write, I hate having to write a statement and fix it. Because I think the spoken word, the immediacy of the spoken word is 10 times more telling. I'm not going to talk about 24-year-old Richard Burton playing Hamlet. Hello. Can you imagine that? Can you understand that? With Ophelia as 21-year-old Claire Bloom. I'm not going to tell you about what it meant for me to actually meet T.S. Eliot at that festival when he was commissioned to write a play in blank verse. Oh, God, that doesn't happen too often, does it? I have never, ever taken seriously a situation which is not historic. If you're not dealing with a historic element in what you're doing, you are in the world of entertainment, where you note that you're dealing with famous people, success stories. That's why I worry a bit, because the Edinburgh Festival is now infested with a world that provides easy money. It's not that I dislike these poor souls, and I think some of them are very clever, but they're known as stand-up comics. But the one thing they can't do, and this is how I'm going to end, the one thing they can't do is what the poet can do. They can make you laugh for an hour. Those of you who are ill-advised to sit there and find yourself laughing hysterically for an hour. I mean, it won't get, you'll ask for your money back if you're not laughing that often and as long. But the great artist and the Edinburgh Festival is not about the stand-up comic. It's about those human beings who use their gifts as creative people, knowing that if we ask ourselves the question, when have we the right to call ourselves an artist? When did you become an artist? Well, I think you're an artist usually when you're a child and you delight in that unbelievable world of innocence where you pick up a piece of paper and you draw and you dance and you skip and you jump. And that's the world that we deserve to hold on to throughout our adult lives. And through the arts, we can. And art is something so precious that it can tell us a truth that not even the scientists can tell. I've got a feeling I've got to write a letter to Stephen Hawking. And it will contain a quote, and I've just realized I can't remember it, but I'm going to try my best. And this quote is in the language of a great artist who happened to be a Scot, and his name was Hugh MacDiarmid. And I found myself using this poem in addressing at 8 o'clock in the morning the entire school of Etonians, those that were not in chapel praying. And I began my little speech by saying, I can't believe you're listening to me when you should all be in that wonderful chapel built by Henry VIII for you to pray. But you're going to have to listen to me, and I'm going to give you one piece of information. I know, Anne, it's right on target. But I didn't start until 2 minutes past. And here's the quote. I'd like Peter Higgs to hear this. It's in the Gaelic, so I had to translate it into English for these Etonians. Mars is braw in cramacy, Venus in her green silk gown. The stars a ween o' blethers, but earth, ye bonny brookit bairn, cry een tear, and you'll droon the hale clamjamfrey. Should I translate? It's such a beautiful poem. One human tear in the whole of the universe is enough, and it can be found only on this tiny, broken, little, vulnerable planet. And I think that says it all. It tells you that we must take tears as seriously as we take laughter, and that the great tragedian, the world of Shakespeare, is about two masks, the one representing our capacity to laugh, and the other about our capacity to cry a tear. And with that thought, I think the Edinburgh Festival is really all about that. And that's what it's given me, that truth. And it's meant that I don't have a minute to spare to resign from the task of celebrating the language of art with everyone I am privileged to meet. I'm saying this at the age of 83, and I'm no longer in my 70s, and I'm therefore playing the game of life when I've got to have the ball at my feet because it's extra time. And I thank you for sharing that time with me. Thank you. Now, who's going to ask the first question?
Can I ask you, please, why Mikolsegi?
Oh,
You've got 3 paintings up there, all Mikolsegi, and many years ago you wrote a book about the road to Mikolsegi.
you've got 3 Mikolsegi paintings.
No, I've bought one of them.
You've got one.
Couldn't afford 3.
It's the biggest question you could possibly ask. It's the road that you take from my mountainous space, the village of Piccinisco, 60 miles south of Rome, a village whose history is all about shepherding. It's a village of shepherds. It's a village so high up that it's the world of the wild boar and the wolf. And the people who came here to Edinburgh, not to Glasgow, are mainly from the region in Provincia Frosinone. And their clothes, their costumes are spectacular. Lord Forte came from that region, and he explained to me, you should be very proud. They're called Cicciarone, these people, because they lived their lives very near to the villa of Cicero, who was one of the greatest politicians of all time, who was so wonderfully gifted in the use of language that it was in fact pure poetry. Cicero. It was also the world of Saint Benedict, patron saint of Europe, and Saint Thomas Aquinas, who was a great philosopher and scientist in that glorious time known as the Middle Ages. And when he was dying, I think he weighed over 25 stone or something, and he was gifted with the gift of levitation. Can you imagine a human being praying, that weight rising above, breaking the law of gravity? Anyway, he was asked, surely you're content, you created the Summa Theologica, which more or less explains everything. And his reply on his deathbed was, oh, that heap of straw. Because he knew, like all great artists, that he hadn't really begun. Look, if you're in your 80s, you've got to have a lot of work to do. You've got to think of a future, remembering the huge weight of the past. And I'm thinking of all the people I've known who are senior to me, who are now dead, and how whatever I'm doing now should relate to them, as well as the people who happen to be hanging around alive. I'm thinking, of course, of an archive that I've got, which is not an archive. It's a work of art. It's not mine. It's got about, I don't know, 30,000 significant names in it. Some of them I've mentioned already, with their thoughts, their contributions, their collaborations. So it's the most important archive in Europe. And it explains why Europe is more important in terms of its cultural heritage than China, despite the money that we now associate with China, or India. Why do I say that? Because if we are living in a modern world, where do you think the concept of modernity came from? Which continent? Didn't come from China, didn't come from India, it came from Europe. So, I think the road to Mikolsegi is my need to seek out all the almost forgotten roads, which are usually drovers' roads, taking the animals to market, but which are ancient tracks of pilgrims and medieval scholars moving from, let's say, the great universities of Scotland, Glasgow, medieval universities, Aberdeen, St Andrews, via Oxford and Cambridge. Remember, Scotland had 3 or 4 universities, and the poor English had only 2. They managed to keep going, though, but we've got to keep going with our concept of universities. And of course, these people were traveling towards Rome via the Sorbonne, via Padua, Bologna, the great medieval universities, via Krakow, another medieval university. That's where my heart is, where the libraries are. I need libraries. Most art that I look at now, which is called contemporary art, has such a tiny sliver of truth embedded in it that I can't waste time looking at it. I have to take into account the great river of truth that is in the lives of all the people who really did deal with the history of ideas. I believe there's no such thing as Scottish art or British art. I said that. It's just art. I want to use that language. It'll be the language if my work is to be meaningful, which will be used 500 years from now, when everybody's forgotten about political, how can I say, conversations. Anyway, there must be another language question. I'd love. Why did you ask that question?
Because it's a place name.
It's on the map.
I know I've been past it. It's a tiny wee place.
It's so tiny, but at one time I had 200 people living and working there, employed by the family of John Calder, making beer and whiskey. I don't like the idea of places falling off the map that we use to be replaced by signs to Tesco or to the airport. They're not the real places.
Ricky, first of all, I'd just like to say an enormous thank you. I grew up in Edinburgh, and you've been a very strong and clear landmark in the artistic environment I grew up in since I was in primary school. So I think it's largely your fault that I became an artist. But also, I would like to feel that I was still an emerging artist at the age of 83, so I've got a few years to catch up. But I would like to know more about where you plan to go next. When's your next Edinburgh Festival exhibition going to be?
My next, well, I am going to complement the program that Jonathan Mills has put together, which is predominantly about war and the great works of art through the centuries that have dealt with that theme. Part of it is one of my favorite novels, All Quiet on the Western Front. I saw it as a film. That taught me that the hero can be wearing the uniform of the enemy. But it's also about, it really is about warfare and its aftermath and the madness of it all. And I am therefore bound to look at the Demarco archives and find out all the artists who wore uniforms and who actually were involved in the war. One of them was Hugh MacDiarmid, who was in the Dardanelles. One was somebody who taught me called Sir William Gillis, who I think was also in and around the Dardanelles. And everyone who taught me at art school came first into my sight wearing uniform. I mean, you know, they looked really handsome in their uniforms. And you could think that wearing a uniform was a good idea. The people who were teaching me at school also wore uniforms. Now, it's difficult to believe that you were a student at a time when someone had come back from the experience of 42 missions, bomber missions, over Germany. That was a particularly important artist called George Mackey. He never quite recovered. He's still alive, thank God. I feel that I'm going to have to work on the archive so that it's in a condition where it can be seen as an academic research tool for you to study the history of the festival, the history of Europe in the 20th century and now in the 21st century, and the history of all the artists, each individual artist, each individual institution I've had the privilege of working with, museums here, there and everywhere, libraries here, there and everywhere, schools here, there and everywhere. And it frightens me when I wake up in the morning. If it weren't for my dear wife and my assistant Terry, I'd probably not make it through the day. Can you imagine I was supposed to be opening an exhibition of my work, all new work, in a place called Crinan in a few minutes' time. So there's not enough time to sleep. I've not finished all of them, the paintings I mean. But the fact, why Crinan? Well, Crinan is all about the extraordinary history of the kingdom of Dalriada, which linked Scotland with Ireland. And all my journeys on the road to Mikosegi brought innumerable artists all the way from the Edinburgh Festival into the extension of the Edinburgh Festival, which is the whole of Scotland, especially to the valley of Kilmartin. Kilmartin? Kill? What does that mean? Saint. Kill. Martin. Who was Martin? I think I should remind Farage of this fact. Saint Martin of Tours. He was living in France, the great friend of St. Columba. I mean, the St. Martin's cross is the first cross you see as you approach that great abbey on Iona. I know that I am, without doubt, because of my birthright, dealing with the language of art and therefore with a family of artists who are in fruitful collaboration with each other. Or if they're not, I'm not doing my job. And how does Arthur Watson, president of the Royal Scotus Academy, find the money to have a fruitful dialogue with, for example, Japan, or with France, or Poland, or Romania? Well, I've just uttered a word which is not acceptable, because we obviously know the Romanians are uncouth and uncivilized, when in fact they represent a great culture. And it was they who built the Roman wall, because it wasn't the Romans who built the Roman wall between the Solway and the east and west coast of Scotland. It was the Dacians who were the people of Romania. I need to know all these things. And another thing I get worried about, which is that when we isolate the business of studying history from from the world of the art historian, I think, what are we talking about there? I think if you're going to mention art, it should be linked to the history of ideas, to the world of the scientists. Of course, I don't think money has very much to do with it, although you need the basic sums to add up. At the end of it, if you think of all the artists that you've had the privilege of working with, you're dealing with a treasure house. I mean, there are 4,500 and some number, I don't know, of artworks in the Demarco archive. At the moment, there's nowhere to put them. I don't want them hidden away. I want them to be on show. So I might have to go to the council and say, is there any other city better placed to have this archive? Or do I have to really go to Łódź? Or, let me think, I think of all the other cities that I love and care for. Because the road to Micosegi is the road known to all the Scottish kings, to Robert the Bruce. It's the road to Rome. And it's the road known to people like Lord Byron. Because you weren't properly educated unless you went on the Grand Tour, isn't that right? Because you knew you were dealing with a plonker. If you were dealing with someone who hadn't taken the trouble to go to see the reality that had caused us to have the wit to build something called the New Town. What is the New Town? It's Palladian. It has in it all the rules you need to know if you're an architect. I'm thinking now that I need a few more years.
We've got one last question.
Okay, one more question. Now, the person asking this question has a very interesting name. Could you mention who you are?
My name is Marco Joseph Federici. I'm one of the remaining blood relatives of Richard Demarco. And it's not so much a question, Richard. I just want to take this opportunity. For all your difficulties over the years, as you've enlightened me in this wonderful talk, your battle with the Arts Council, the festival, with bureaucrats, financial organisations, I always thought one of your greatest battles was often with the family, and those that sadly didn't understand the immense work and contribution to world thought, and contribution to the legacy of the family that you've left, and will continue, I hope for many years, to expand upon. And so for those that are no longer here, those that weren't brave enough to pick up a book, to pick up a pen despite all of their talents and all of their intelligence, I would like this opportunity to apologise on their behalf. And I hope that wherever they lie in the celestial sphere, that they have somehow found their way to Micosegi and found that enlightenment. And for that, Richard Demarco, thank you very much for your contribution towards the family. We are eternally grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to thank Lord Provost Donald Wilson, who is a heavily disguised artist. You become heavily disguised when you wear that chain around your neck. But he has helped me, and he has done a great deal of work to reassure me that maybe the time has come when I can work with my native city, native country. And I feel that this is the most remarkable thing. I think I am the first person to be given this award, the Edinburgh Award, and who's also been given the challenge of delivering the Edinburgh lecture. I don't think it's happened to too many. No. So I just want you to know, if you live to your 80s, life can really begin in earnest. And it's worth the wait. And it's important to find a language which connects you with everyone you've ever loved and worked with, and all those you can anticipate, not yet born, but sure as you can imagine, are on their way. And really, that's the one language which is the language of the teacher generation after generation of young people, and it's, how can I put it, a great feeling of gratitude I have towards the Lord Provost and the councillors for giving me the opportunity to speak, but also to thank them. And all I can say is, if you've got the ball at your feet in extra time, you know you've got a chance of coming off the pitch feeling you've done something worthwhile. And that's my message. And how do you get to the business beyond extra time to playing in penalty shootout time? Well, use the language of the arts. Thank you.